اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين. قال الله العظيم في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Tonight's discussion is for those that are older and of more understanding in this subject, but it is a necessary discussion. And Allah Azza wa Jal, after speaking about the believers and they being successful, and they are the ones that have sincerity in their prayers, and they are the ones that turn away from ill speech, and they are the ones that pay their alms and pay their zakat, then he says they are the ones that guard their private parts. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. If you look at the biggest and the most crimes that are committed in the world, they are related to this subject. More sin is accumulated here than reward. When it comes to this subject, this is where all the problems stem from. However, Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions protection and guarding the private parts. He does not say abstinence. In fact, in Islam, abstinence is prohibited. As the Catholic clergy, or you will find without not only the clergy, also the monasteries, the the convents of the nuns, they have, and the monasteries as well, they have the code of abstinence, where they refrain from any intimacy whatsoever. And I have to use my words wisely. You know, the kids can assume that they're watching a television program that's got jokes that they cannot understand. But this is the way it's going to work, because this is necessary. But if we look at this protection, it is a form of modesty. Not abstinence, but a form of modesty. And modesty, generally associated with women, people tend, when they hear modesty, they think women. Now, modesty is a form of it is stopping the self from what is forbidden and what is inappropriate, rather than prohibition altogether. So, if we were to look at protecting the private part, it begins with the heart, where that I do not think initially about committing sin, nor do I sin with my eye, so then that my private parts can be guarded from this. And this is where the sin begins, because this is where the devil works from. Now, to have this modesty, according to the narrations, it says, the narration, he says, ما المجاهد الشهيد في سبيل الله بأعظم أجرا ممن قدر فعفى لكاد العفيف أن يكون ملكا من الملائكة. Firstly, before I explain this narration, I need to explain that there are two types of modesty when it comes to being modest. There is that modesty, that affa, that we abstain when we are around people. Okay? Because we don't have the opportunity. I mean, how many people here are going to commit sin while they're here? We're around people. There's no reason for us to do something wrong. So we lack the opportunity. We can't claim that this is modesty. We lack the opportunity, and any act other than that, then people will see, you know, there'll be an exposure that they have not seen before of this person. This is why you'll find you don't hear much colorful language in an Islamic center, or even around people. We choose our words wisely, we choose how we conduct ourselves. So in this case, the situation doesn't suit itself either because of our reputation in this case, or sometimes there's the incapacity. We are incapacitated. For example, sometimes you can say, for example, I haven't committed genocide. Yeah, of course you haven't. You've never been given the opportunity. You know, how many of you have ruled the country? How many of you have been put in a position where you run a fleet of ships? No one's been put in this position. Or you are commanding an army. So you can say, I've never committed genocide. Of course, you haven't been given the opportunity to. So this isn't a modesty in any way, or a way that you're refraining from sin. For example, when it comes to the modesty or guarding your private parts, someone may say, look, I've never been intimate with an actor. You know, female actor, طبعا, they don't use the word actress anymore. Or vice versa. In the case of females, but then you turn around and say, man, who's going to be interested in you? Who are you? You're not a person of status. So the opportunity hasn't presented itself. Where the opportunity does present itself, when you are absent from people, whether you're home alone or you're in another city altogether. You know, if you look here, a lot of people like to go to Bangkok, and they love to go to Thailand to be, you know, if you mention someone in Thailand, that in Thailand there is over, I think, about 60% of the species of animals in the world in the rainforest. People say, what? It's something like that. It's amazing. The rainforest in Thailand, amazing, but people aren't there for the rainforests. Most of the people, they go there because they have the cover of the country being full of Buddhists, and no one's going to know what I'm doing. You know, in the United Kingdom, they used to all go to Morocco. And I used to think to myself, what takes you to, you know, Marrakesh? What's there? There's magic, and there's the oldest known trade. That's about all that's there. So what takes you to Marrakesh? That's right. They're hiding, they're away, they're all into magic for some reason. It's like when someone used to go down to Canberra and they're on their way to Fishwick, and you go, there's fireworks there and pornography. That's all that they used to sell in Fishwick. So what would take you there? People say, yeah, I'm going to go get fireworks. This is what would happen back then. This is the places that people would go to. And this is where the truth is revealed. This is where your faith is exposed. And the narration here says, Mimman qadar, from those that have the opportunity and have the ability, not just from anybody. If you have the ability and have the opportunity to sin, yet you refrain because of modesty, you refrain from committing an illicit sin because of modesty, the narration says, ما المجاهد الشهيد في سبيل الله بأعظم أجره. That Allah says from this through His messenger, that the mujahid, a mujahid is a shaheed, not just a mujahid, someone that fights in the way of Allah and is killed in the way of Allah does not have reward as great as who? He says, ممن قدر فعفى لكاد العفي عفوا ممن قدر فعفى. Firstly, before I go to the next part, that the reward of the one that has ability to commit sin, he's away from people. No one's there to watch him. You know, he's got internet connection in his room and there's no one there. He's got his ability to commit sin, yet he refrains. His reward is greater than the one that fights in the way of Allah and is killed in the way of Allah. And this is why we call it jihad al-akbar. This jihad al-nafs is the greater jihad. So their reward is far greater. Yet, it goes on to say, he says, لَكَادَ الْعَفِيفُ أَنْ يَكُونَ مَلَكًا مِنَ الْمَلَائِكَةِ. You imagine this. It is as if they are an angel. They are like an angel amongst the angels. If you look at Iblis, Iblis's worship was so great, and of the reasons that he was allowed to remain on the earth, one of the narrations on Al-Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says that he performed a 2 rak'at salah that lasted for 4,000 years. 4,000 years. If you can calculate how much that is, if you want to add it up, if we probably combine the ages of everyone seated here, would probably be double that. Or maybe, say 4/3 of that. Of what, I'm just assuming, I'm calculating. Of what he worshipped in a 2 rak'at salah. The angels would look upon Iblis and they would say, they would refer to him as Tawus al-Malaika. You know, Tawus is the peacock, which is the most attractive to the eye of all the animals. So amongst the angels would view him as a peacock amongst the angels. That he was in worship, he was unmatched. And taban, he fell. But from your actions, Allah Azza wa Jal, He through His messenger says, as if you are one of the angels, yet the angels don't have a conscience. And you do. They are there only with intellect. They are there only to worship. And you, without this, with this conscience that causes you or involves in having you sin, you restrict yourself, you are considered as one of the angels. And if I'm on the other end of the scale, you know those people that go through life, they eat, they're hungry, they eat anything they see. You know, and if they want to mate, they're like animals. If they want to mate, they mate with anything they see. They are in the Quran regarded as not animals, but worse than animals. Because once again, the animal here has no aql, no intellect. Animals act on instinct. أحب العفاف إلى الله تعالى عفاف البطن والفرج. When it comes to modesty, the most beloved modesty in Allah's eyes, that Allah prefers for us, is the modesty. Every part, there's a modesty of the hand, there's a modesty of the eye, there's a modesty of the tongue. He says the modesty of the stomach. Do not eat what is forbidden. Not inshallah it's halal and just eat it. You know, I remember once this guy wanted to eat at one of the fast food chains. And he said, I called them and they said it's 98% vegetable oil, 2% animal fat. And so what did you do? He said, I ate it. You know, Allah will forgive me for the 2%. You know, you can't judge in this manner. You can't just throw it away, your stomach. And when it comes to the private part, where Allah Azza wa Jal says to God, وَالْحَافِظِينَ فُرُوجَهُمْ وَالْحَافِظَاتِ. He talks about both male and female to guard their private parts. Now, when we say وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ, what does that mean? Does that mean that they wear a hector protector? You know, a cup as they call it. You know, the cricketers, you know that thing that wear the hector? that they wear downstairs. Is that what that means? That means, all right, you know, is someone wearing a jock strap? Yep. Is this what it's about? What does it mean to guard your private part? What it means is Allah continues, and tomorrow night's inshaAllah's discussion will be about this. About marriage, inshaAllah, tomorrow night. Now we are given options here. Anything that is not prohibited you may do. However, the initial state, okay, the rule is it's forbidden. Your private part is something that must be guarded. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. That means the rule is that everything is prohibited. Illa. Then the exception comes in. على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين. That the only thing where it's permitted, you know, some people say, well, you know, this may be permitted or that may be permitted. If there is a doubt, it is forbidden. What is permissible is what Allah Azza wa Jal has made as an exception in this verse. Either you get married, whether you get married permanently or you get married temporary marriage, or ma malakat aymanuhum. This is something that you're not going to be involved in. Why? You know, people used to think ma malakat aymanuhum means what? Have you seen, for example, the Dawa'ish? They invade a region, or say someone gives up their daughter for the Mujahideen, and the guy comes up to her, puts his hand on her head and says Allahu Akbar 3 times, and then that's it, she becomes his servant. And then the next guy comes up and says Allahu Akbar 3 times. Then eventually you saw them putting their hands on the heads of donkeys, as you saw in the vision of the imagery. They just got so into it, they didn't care where they put their hand, and said takbir 3 times and took advantage of them. But this is what happens. Some people came to the opinion, and when they went to the West initially, they used to see a non-Muslim, for example, and then they would say malaktuki, and then they think that means automatically that she has become permissible for me, and this is not true. This is not the case. The only time where it becomes permissible is under Allah's direct command. Allah's direct command, where He has a representative, a direct representative, which means a ma'soom, a prophet or an imam, who is there. Even if you look at the mujahideen that are around today, none of the ulama allow this, because it must come from a direct command from God, that when you fight those that are in battle, that are taken as of the war booty, must be under the law of God to permit them to become of those that your right hand possesses. So we'll put that aside. This is not our discussion. Now, what we are looking at here is what is allowed when it comes to the private part. Some people will come up with the idea that self-stimulation is permissible. That this is permissible. Someone will say, hold on, it's allowed. There's no issue. What do you want us to do? We are in a state where... you could say, for example, I'll take you to many places around the world where people don't fast. In Islamic countries, you ask them, why don't you fast? They say, I'm hungry, or I'm thirsty. Where did they get it from? I can't fast, it's too hot here. Allah Azza wa Jal has given us concessions. For example, if I am traveling, I may shorten my prayers. That's a concession. Yarhamukumullah. If I am fasting and I travel, I have a concession from God that I can break my fast. There's rules to observe with these. If I am sick and incapable of fasting due to this sickness, because this illness may cause me to become even more sick or to die, then I cannot fast. This is a concession. Where there is a concession has been made. Allah has permitted for those not capable of marrying permanently to marry temporarily. And taban, this has its conditions before people say, so I can, do that without observing the laws. You have to observe the laws that exist for all these. However, there is no concession when it comes to self-stimulation whatsoever. And the proof of this in these verses, besides the history of the rulings of the ulama, there is no evidence of this existing. One man was brought before the Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, and this man was involved engaging with himself. So they brought him, so afwan, with the wording, it's deliberate because there's a lot of young people here that haven't started to explore themselves yet, so we don't want to bring it to their attention. So anyway, so they brought this man before Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, and the Imam beat his hand for doing this and then told the people to get him married. And this is important. Whether someone gets married, like I said, permanently or temporarily, they have to get married. You cannot stay to someone, for example, practice abstinence. One of the older men told me, he said, when I was young, he said, I had this problem. What do? I need to deal with my situation. He said, I went up to the first alim and I said to him, I've got a problem. He said, he came up to me and he gave me a book and it was called Al-Mut'ah. And he said, and this he's talking about the 1970s. Free love was in the United States, not in Lebanon. So anyway, he took the book. He said, I looked at it. He goes, it was like, getting one of those books that tells you how to make $1 million. It's not going to make you the $1 million. You're just going to read it. And it's not going to give you the do-it-yourself kit. It's just a book. It's not going to help you. He said, then I went up to the next alim and he said, can you get married? And I said, no. And he said, all right, listen. Go and buy some ice and pour it down your pants. That's the only solution I can give you. In other words, the only way around it is marriage. This is why Allah Azza wa Jal calls you to get married. Marriage is a solution. It's not when I own a house and when I have the money. No, you get married. Things come after this. Once you do the aqd, things fall in place after that. And taban, tomorrow night is the night that I wish to talk about marriage. The results of modesty come in this world before the next. And the best example that we know is the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. For those that read it in the tafsir and those that watched the show. I've never watched the show, but everyone says it was awesome. Before the next. And this is where we have that concept of lowering your gaze, and we have the concept of hijab. Hijab, which we generally associate once again with women. But hijab is the meaning of this is a covering. It's supposed to be some border or covering between a man and a woman when it comes to their dealings. The verse in the Quran says, وَإِذَا سألتموهن متاعا فاسألوهن من وراء حجاب ذلكم أطهر لقلوبكم وقلوبهن. So if we look at the modesty here and the purpose of hijab, its purpose is what? For purity. It keeps away problems. Problems begin initially when I break these boundaries. Not only for the woman. See, when the woman wears hijab, the purities and the protection's not only for her. The protection is for her, and likewise it is for the male. The male's protected in this way from committing sin. You know, sometimes they used to always make an attack. Do you remember when the Sheikh made this statement and they attacked him for it? The one he said that who's at fault, the cat or the piece of meat that's left in the street. Now, funnily enough, they attacked him. And they said, look, he's blaming the piece of meat. You know, in other words, of a woman scantily clad. Or that Sheikh Faiz, where he said that any woman that doesn't observe hijab is eligible for rape. You know, which was even more outlandish. But the thing is, with Sheikh Tair's statement, there is something that they abide by. They abide by in this country. How do they abide by? Are you allowed to park your car outside unlocked? Can you unlock your car? If a police officer passes by and your car's unlocked and you are not next to the car, you'll get fined. And you ask them why, they go, because you are enticing someone to steal it. So you apply the same law that you abuse someone of mentioning it. Now, either way, it's no form of, you're not condoning any action. However, when you put protection, even if someone's head is swaying left or right, you protect yourself from this point. And honestly, when someone gets dressed and they dress in very skimpy clothing or tight clothing, what's the purpose of wearing something tight? Why do they wear something tight? So people can walk past and ignore them? They wear something tight so people can look. Do you think they get upset when someone whistles at them? They give that look of disapproval, but they're not disapproving. They're going, way to go, keep whistling, clap your hands, stomp your feet. I'm enjoying this. That's why I'm dressed like this. This is the purpose of this dress. This is the reason. And hijab, likewise, the purpose of hijab is the exact opposite, is to protect yourself from this. So when someone turns around and goes, Wallah al-hijab la bi'lik. It's not supposed to suit you. When they tell you, oh, the hijab looks good on you, it's not supposed to look good on you. Now I was once, this woman was asking me a question the whole time she was covering her mouth. And you know, sometimes, you know, I didn't know what the reason was for her covering her mouth. And then as I left, person told me, do you know why she was covering her mouth? And I said, why? She had lipstick. She had lipstick on. And I said, man, she's got lips. She doesn't care who can watch her or who can see her, but I come along because she doesn't want to get abused about it. So she covers her mouth as she speaks. And in other words, even though she's wearing hijab, she realizes that this lipstick is not a part of the hijab. Yani fitra. You can't sit there. You don't need to explain to someone what the purpose of hijab is. So through this, the woman disciplines the man with the hijab. And Allah Azza wa Jal says, زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. We'll stop there. I don't want to go into the next of it, the rest of it. But Allah Azza wa Jal said that He has beautified for mankind the love of their desires, and He begins of the women, with the women, the opposite gender. So by putting on this hijab, we prevent any of this stuff taking place, or any problem here taking place. Another issue with looking and observing that affects you before we talk, because this is the direct connection with the private part. He says, another in the narration, Saham min sihami iblis, masmum. First you're told that This hadith, you know how many times you will find this hadith in different books. This is from Al-Kafi. In different narrations. They always warn you with that look. You take a look. This is the biggest problem. If you look at Moses, Nabi Musa alayhi salam, and you look at the 10 Commandments, for example, you know, thou shalt not commit adultery. It begins, they say, don't commit adultery. Back then, that was the issue where they had to stop it. But then you look into the New Testament, and the Christians read this. You know, if you read, especially you read the laws there in the book of Matthew in chapter 5, when it talks about these, it talks about people committing sin. He says, you have heard in the laws of old that thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say, if one looks with his eye, with lust, he has committed adultery. That look is what generates everything, what begins everything. Then Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam goes one step further and says, do not even think about committing adultery. طبعا, tonight we had Dua Kumail, and because this tonight is linked with tomorrow night's discussion of marriage, and I don't want to hold you up too late. Tomorrow's Friday. Tonight there's a lot of mustahabbat besides Dua Kumail for you to do, and then Ghusl al-Jum'ah tomorrow, and people going to work and whatever you. So we'll finish off with this note. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to grant us, or even though these ad'iyah are not mawjudin, because before it was simplified, and now it's, to grant all the youth here a wife. We ask Allah in this night, Laylatul Jum'ah, in these blessed nights, that all the young men and the young women have a wife, and all the older people that did not get married or failed on the first opportunity, Allah sends them a wife as well, and sends the women a husband. Bi barakat as-salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.